Hello and welcome to our podcast Eetikakeskustelu. I am Mari-Liis Nummert, project manager for Good Schools and Good Kindergartens in Tartu University Centre for Ethics. Today we have a guest from the UK, Gary Lewis, who also was our keynote speaker in our values-based education conference in 2020. Today we have asked Gary to talk with us again on the value of cooperation, and Gary has very gladly chosen to do so. If any one of you have not been acquainted to Gary before, then Gary has a very rich history in education. He is currently chairing the Association of Character Education in the UK. I would say that it is very similar to our Good School and Good Kindergarten network. In addition, Gary has worked with the leading Center for Character and Virtues Research in Birmingham University. He has collaborated as their Senior Honorary Research Fellow in the Jubilee Center. And also, I think most importantly, I would say, to our listeners, Gary has a very long personal past in schools. He has been the head teacher in several schools and the head of Department of Education in Ofsted, and worked as a character education advisor there. Hello, Gary, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, lovely to speak to you again, and so nice to be working with you once again in Estonia. My great pleasure.
Gary, in your very, very long experience as an educator, if you think about the value cooperation, what does it entail for you? What does it mean? How you would define it?
I think sometimes you need to almost look at a historical perspective, and collaboration comes from, well, certainly in terms of the UK history, of British history. If we go back 200 years, 300 years, people to survive had to work together. They had to work for their common economic needs, for their cultural needs, for their social needs, and they formed cooperatives, whether they were farming cooperatives, whether they were cooperatives to help them survive in terms of living and so on. But either way, they shared the same things. It was a solidarity that they had from working together. And of course, working together only worked if those individuals who were part of the cooperative were able to delegate, were able to collaborate, were able to discuss openly, and perhaps most importantly of all, trust each other. So there's an historical perspective that human beings have a desire to work together, frankly, almost to survive in many instances. So if we take that forward a little bit, and you mentioned, Marie, is cooperation, well, not is it, it is clearly a value. I would suggest that it's an outcome of a range of values, because to actually collaborate, to cooperate effectively, one has to have a set of key character traits or values in place. So such things as honesty, such things as trust, such things as respect, such things as being able to listen to the other person. All of those are almost character traits that are a prerequisite of actually working together collaboratively. And so in terms of, is cooperation a value? Yes, it is, but it is the sum of a whole range of character traits that are necessary for it. In my own personal experience, you know, as I said previously, I've worked in many schools as a principal, as a head teacher. I've worked as a government advisor supporting schools that are in particular difficulty. And one of the things that one notices visiting schools, particularly in difficulties, is they all share certain common things in practice. One of which is they don't work together, they work against each other. And they all share the same lack of culture and ethos. So in such schools where they do not work collaboratively, in fact, they're working individually, there are certain things that are in place, and it's as well to know what those individual things are. So for instance, in such schools, they've got very poor leadership. They've got leadership that is focused on the opposites of cooperation. They're focusing on getting results probably through fear, through forcing people to do it. And of course, that then becomes part of the culture of the actual environment, so that individuals, in order to survive, don't want to work with other people. They actually almost want to put those people down, you know, schadenfreude. They want to actually make themselves look quite good in order to survive by actually disadvantaging somebody else. And that is never going to be a positive scenario for a school. Schools that do the opposite, schools that understand that no individual or groups of individuals are going to create success, it's got to be a team effort. The leaders in those schools focus not on their own performance, not on their own behaviors, but they focus on the behaviors of the whole school. And they build, and again, you've heard me talk about this before, they lay down foundation stones. The first one is that they must have a clear ethos for the school, and that's a set of values determined by the school community, by the leaders of the school, by dialogue with parents, certainly by dialogue with the students, so that there are a shared set of common, clear values that everybody understands. So that's kind of number one. The next rung on that most important thing to establish cooperation is the culture of the school. And certainly in my experience, visiting so many schools, something like 254 in the last 3 years, that many of them don't quite understand what culture is. And when people ask me, well, what do you think it is, Gary? I think it's those values, those behaviors that are recognized in the routines in school. So the things that people do without thinking, they don't have to think about their culture. So if we've got a culture of kindness, of respect, when you visit such a school, you'll see students and teachers and non-teaching staff not even thinking about opening doors, saying please and thank you, working together with respect, listening to each other, an absence of shouting and aggressive language. They don't have to think about it because it's part of the culture of the school. So those are the preconditions for having collaborative working. You cannot have people collaborating if they don't trust each other, and if they don't respect each other, and they don't have the basic skill set in order to communicate, to collaborate. We'll come on a little bit later on to talk about the key things that are going to be necessary to work in as a team. Go back to
Harry, how is it that if we would imagine the school culture as like an iceberg, because this iceberg theory is very popular in the culture theory, that there are some things we see the top of the iceberg, and then some things we don't see, the hidden parts of the culture. And let's adapt this theory to school, that the school is an iceberg, and we have the hidden parts and we have the observable parts. If we would, for example, visiting a school, see that people are acting unkind to each other in routines, is it a problem of the culture, or is it the precondition before it? Is it the values problem? Should we go back to the values part? Is there something wrong there? What do you think?
Right. Well, I mean, you've summarized it perfectly. You cannot have a positive culture in a school unless there's a set of underpinning values. The firstly has to be a set. I would always suggest 3 values that are good enough to run any organization. There are, as you well know, there are hundreds of different values and character traits that are particularly important, but they all tend to boil down. They summarize themselves in 3 main values, one of which is empathy, being able to understand other people, feel what other people are feeling. The other one is taking responsibility for yourself, for your own actions, and understanding that's the case. And the other one, a bit more of a performance virtue, is courage, is determination, keeping going when you don't want to. So if a school has determined a set of values, then it's got a chance of creating a culture. But to have those sustainable routines of behavior that define the culture, remember, those are the behaviors that people don't even have to think about, they just perform like it. It can only be done if there's a set of values. So you can't behave in a positive way if you don't understand what those values are. And unfortunately, it always returns to the leadership of the school. It is the leadership of the school and the senior leadership that determines how important those values are in creating the culture. And that leadership must constantly reinforce it, revisit it, and not accept behaviors that undermine it. So it's not just about promoting those values in all the sorts of good practice that many schools will do, but it's also not allowing those undermining activities and behaviors, which can be incredibly damaging. And many leaders that I work with, the ones that are struggling, is they don't have the courage, they don't have that determination to challenge those sorts of behaviors. And as we're going to be speaking about in a few moments, again, my experience in those schools is they haven't understood the whole value of communication. How do we go about communicating with each other? Because if we don't focus on communication, on how we speak, body language, written communication, which in the era of the internet has become ever more important, emails in particular, then you cannot create a culture. If culture is based on relationships, relationships are based on communication. So there's always this circular sort of route by which we must link the behaviors within a school.
Mm-hmm. This is very interesting, because it leads me to something that I've thought about, these preconditions for good cooperation. Because if you set these two things that are vital, this school values, school ethics, and school culture that follows it, these things themselves contain some preconditions, right?
Yeah.
To create values, for example, as a school leader and the school board member or member of the teaching staff, I need to have some certain skill set as well, or some sort of motivation for that, or to adapt these values to practice.
Yeah.
So the school culture could become values in actions in this routine level. I need to have a set of skills as well. So if you would take these things apart, again, to these preconditions for cooperation and divide them to smaller parts, what would they be?
Well, I mean, let's break those down a little bit, and let's look at this whole concept of what is the fabric that stitches together good relationships within a school. And I'm going to repeat it time and time again. It is how we communicate. And yet, far too many schools do not concentrate on that. I know many school leaders who appoint new teachers. They don't take care in ensuring that those new teachers, when they join the school, are fully inducted. They're not trained in what the culture of the school is. So they don't understand what it is. They're not clear about those values. And the very best schools, certainly in the UK, and I suspect internationally, are those schools where the leadership understand we must teach everybody how to speak with each other, how to communicate, not leave it to chance. And all of the misunderstandings, all of the difficulties that I recognized in my years as a principal in schools, almost 98% of the time, it was down to poor communication. If we're looking at behavior issues in the classroom, it's because there's aggressive communication, there's a lack of understanding, there's a lack of respect, there's a lack of trust. All of those things have to be built into any conversation. And if they don't exist, then you can't take the culture forward. So number one is the ability to communicate accurately, and teachers in particular must be taught how to do that, not leave it to chance at all. And there are three parts to communication. I mean, it's well understood, although sometimes people don't think about it. The words that we use, the actual words that we put together, the tone of our voice, that's absolutely important, to how we communicate feelings and expectations, how we interpret feelings from somebody else, but also how we communicate our own feeling. And by far the most important is body language, how we present ourselves. And I get very concerned when I go to schools these days, and I think in terms of effective communication, only about 13% of effective communication is the words that we use. The vast majority is our body language. What is our mouth doing? Particularly what are our eyes doing? Are we smiling? Are we being positive? And if people are not seeing that, if they're missing out on that, which of course they do if you're on an email communication, then you are making it very difficult to communicate values and culture. And that's it's almost impossible to do. So let's just reiterate those three things that we must have in place. Ethos leading to culture. The values are then going to be lived in the culture of the school, and culture is defined as what people do without thinking, behaviors that are automatic. That only takes place if there is a clear understanding that if people are going to work together, collaborate together, exist together, they have to have a key value, Aristotelian value, of empathy, being able to understand how other people feel. If a school isn't working on creating empathy, growing empathy, then by definition, you're not going to create positive cultures. And the third bit that links in with those, all of those are tied together by outstanding communication. So those are the three key ingredients for actually having effective collaboration in the school. Now, many other ways of going about it, but those are the three key ingredients.
Can I ask about the ingredient of communication? Because you mentioned in our private conversation that you're literally teaching teachers how to communicate, that it's doable and it helps and it shows results. How to do it? I understand why it's necessary. I see it. I see it in school that sometimes these barriers tend to arise because of not the communication that is being done, but what has been undone in an email, what has been undone, or what has been undone in a short conversation or interaction. And usually you can grasp it afterwards, if you have time to think about it. How to do it? How do you train people in a way that it is not patronizing or like this, I tell you that you have to be a better communicator, or even in a sort of sense, you said that a part of this communication is this open body language and this openness of presence. The British are known for their saying stiff, reserved, or stiff upper lip. And I think Estonians also are quite well known, or they tend to think of themselves as emotionally kind of like reserved, and this like especially this facial emoting and physical emoting are not natural, I would say, to many.
I mean, look, I mean, when I'm talking about facial expressions, I mean, there's all sorts of extravagant examples of facial expressions. And if we take that idea of why are people less comfortable, and you mentioned the British, or the classic so-called British stiff upper lip. I'm not quite sure the British stiff upper lip still exists, but it's perhaps still there. I think it largely boils down to lack of confidence. If you are not confident, if you're not competent, then you tend to create distance between yourself and the source of that something which is causing discomforture. And if I think about how relationships develop, for instance, between teachers and parents, let's just have a look, let's examine that for 3 or 4 minutes. I know many teachers who are very underconfident in talking to parents because they are not confident enough in what they're doing, and they feel that the parent is going to criticize them. They feel that the parent is looking for weaknesses, or is looking to somehow win an engagement with that teacher. And of course, as soon as a teacher feels like that, as soon as they feel that they lack confidence, as soon as they feel that they are not competent, then they will set up barriers, many of them subconscious barriers. They will not ring the parent back because they don't want to, so they leave it a day or two before they telephone the parent, and all that does is create further anxiety. And at the same time, the parent is worried that the teacher is thinking that they're not a good enough parent, and that somehow the parent is being criticized by the school for not doing that. So you've got these two camps, these two sides, the teacher representing the school and the parent already, before they've even perhaps met each other. If the communication hasn't been established properly, there's a sense of fear, there's a sense of wishing to do the other one down, to actually attack the other individual, and that's never going to be a basis for good communication. So when I'm working with teachers at school and they say, well, you know, Gary, I've got a very difficult conversation with a parent tomorrow morning. I'm really worried about it. I'm very nervous. And we've made some mistakes at the school and the parent's fully aware of it. How do I go about that conversation? Well, there are some basics about it. I mean, apart from the fact of, you know, being polite and pleasant and all those, we can talk about that, is actually determine, before you even enter the conversation, what do you want to get out of it? This isn't about you beating that parent. This is about you making sure the parent understands that you're going to work with them collaboratively. And one of the most powerful tools of working with parents is to apologize. If the school has done something wrong, which it will do, it's after all made of human beings, when it makes a mistake, one of the most powerful things you can do when communicating is apologize. Say to the parent, look, we've made a mistake there. Your son, your daughter, they suffered an injustice, or it didn't go as we had planned. We're going to make sure that desperately doesn't happen again. And we want to work with you on that to make sure it doesn't. So please accept our apology. But now we're working together. I know you as a parent want the best for your child. I can assure you as a teacher and as a school, we want the best of your child, and we can work together. Now, obviously, in our conversation today, we're talking about a little snippet about how such a conversation can be constructed. But we must think about the conversation, just with a parent, for instance, in the same way that we plan a lesson. I see too many teachers stumble into conversations with parents without having prepared it, without thinking about what they want from it at the other end, and without keeping personality out of it. Subjective feelings have to be kept out of those conversations, and an objective, a tangible objective, which is not to do with emotions, not to do with feelings, that has to be the target. So yes, I mean, there's no doubt about it, Marie, communication can be taught without being patronizing. I mean, sometimes schools just have to simply accept that, you know, we have to go back to basics. You know, we can have training together as a staff, and we can all look, no matter what skill sets we have, we can all look at how we communicate with each other and with parents. And the schools that do that, certainly in my experience, they develop the best culture, the best collaborative cultures.
I agree with you, and I think it's an interesting observation, and I see it here as well, that the prevalent pre-notion seems to be that from both parents and teachers' side is that if either or wants a contact, then it has to be something bad, and this communication is oftentimes avoided, or it has people try to find ways how to have the conversation later on sometime, and it shows to me something that you pointed out and said, that it has to be something else. It has to be, as you said, a confidence matter, competence matter, that we tend to think or do this way in schools, with parents or parents to schools. And in the end, this not communicating will not create better communication, but will create discommunication between people, right?
Absolutely right. I mean, and I think sometimes simple human psychology, when you're running schools and you're tied up with the demands of a big institution, or indeed not just a school, any company, any institution, we lose sight of basic human psychology. And if I think about what I like getting back from people, if you think what you like getting back from people, it's pretty well the same for everybody else. We want people to be kind to us. We want people to give us feedback, not always positive feedback, but we don't mind critical feedback as long as it's not attacking us as an individual. If somebody says to me, Gary, that report you did was quite good, but I was a little bit concerned about that because I think you missed out some evidence that the data showed wasn't as accurate as, it doesn't matter. As long as it's a criticism about a technicality or an objective feeling, then I can have conversations with other people that can really be quite critical, but they're critical and not criticizing the individual or the person's personality. So schools have to understand that actually we can turn things around. I remember it took me many years as a head teacher. I'm not even pretending that at the beginning I understood this, but after many years of experience, I used to ensure that every Friday afternoon, my personal assistant used to clear an hour and a half of all the other things I would be having to do run a school. And I used to sit down and write 3 or 4 letters or make 3 or 4 conversations to parents or people that were working with the school, which were positive, entirely positive. And if you think about a parent, most of the communications they get from schools are going to be negative. It's when something's gone wrong. And that automatically puts them on the defensive. I'm a parent who I've got 3 grown-up children. And if you ever got a communication from the school and say, oh, Mr. Lewis, we want to talk about your son, Gregory, I'm immediately thinking, you know, they're attacking my son, they're assaulting my son, they're not being positive to him. Before anything's happened, I'm thinking that. So actually, if parents are getting used to having positive conversations with schools before they get the negative, that it automatically changes the tone of the relationship. So I used to write on a Friday afternoon, particularly to parents who are having difficulties, find something positive that happened, try and get a situation where I was saying to the parent, thank you very much for supporting the school. I can remember one where a young girl was always challenging the school uniform. As you know, in the UK, the children wear school uniforms. And this parent was having difficulties. She wanted to try and support the school, but the child was pretty willful. So what we did is that the form tutor of the child worked with the child. He rang the parent and said, look, we're trying to go and try and do this together. I then wrote a week later saying, so thank you very much, Mrs. Smith, for working with us. It's really improved what's going on with your daughter in school. And this is Mrs. Smith, who was very challenging to the school, suddenly felt great about herself, really good about herself. And she went on social media and was saying to other mums, just speak to the school. If you've got a problem, they'll sort it out. I didn't realize that they wanted to be so helpful. So suddenly what was very negative sets of communication can be very quickly turned around. But it has to be done purposefully. It doesn't just happen. You have to create that culture of positive communication.
I think it's very important, the thing that you stressed, that it should be purposeful. And before that, you stressed also that we shouldn't take it face value, or even perhaps it's a fallacy that we think that teachers, like grown-ups that end up working in schools or in education, or parents who are also grown-ups, that just because they are grown up, that they are excellent communicators, or if we would adapt to the wider things of this conversation, that they are excellent in cooperating with each other, that they have the necessary skills or the mindset to do so, that we should constantly pay attention to the soft factors that play part there as well, and try to develop.
What you're describing there is the essence of high quality leadership. Remember I said earlier on, not focusing on what seems to be the most obvious things, such as examination performance, you know, financial issues in the school, all of which are very important, but the fundamentals that allow everybody to do their job: trust, high quality relationships, values, a culture that actually supports everybody else. That's where the leadership need to have the courage to be able to focus on, because if they got the courage to focus on those things, the rest will happen, because teachers will feel empowered, they'll be autonomous, they'll be able to work independently, and they'll be able to do a really good professional job. And then the job of the leader, the principal, the head teacher, becomes so much easier. But I do find that sometimes, particularly senior leaders that are struggling in terms of their own personal confidence, they think that they can grow personal confidence by being ever more destructive, ever more challenging, ever more disciplinarian with their staff and with their students, and that never works. It never works.
You previously stressed these three principles that help to form this good cooperation culture in a school, and they were this strong ethics, this organization culture, and the third, that the organization culture is practiced in these routines, that is routinely seen, and you don't even have to think about it. It's so internalized.
Yes, exactly.
And also you said that there are 3 values that help with this in general, like empathy, there was
self-regulation, taking responsibility for yourself. You know, people have to learn, even when you're working collaboratively, you must take personal responsibility for your own behaviors, because even though you're in a team, your individual performance in that team is crucial to how the team works. So self-responsibility is crucial.
Empathy, there was self-responsibility, sense of responsibility, and this.
And the other one,
courage,
I mean, it could be called lots of different things. but courage perhaps sums it up. You know, determination, courage, ability to carry on doing things when other people are saying don't do it, or you feel that you know there are stresses from, I don't know, inspectors or whatever, to do different things rather than focus on what is the most important. And that's the human beings that are actually working for you. You know, you cannot, a school is an intense cauldron of emotion and relationships. And if we don't focus on the relationships, and that's the communication, then the rest will not happen. And then you're going to get negativity, you're going to get fear, manipulation, and that's, well, that leads to disaster. And I've seen that on far too many occasions, I'm afraid, far too many occasions.
I actually wanted to ask from your, I would say, sea of experiences, all those principles for good cooperation, what have been like the pitfalls or like the stories where you have seen that this is, it's not where you have seen that it's not as easy as it is said? No,
it is not easy, Marie, and quite often there's a whole range of different things. I can't say this enough, it all stems from senior leadership of the school. If the person leading the school or the very senior team, if they are values driven, if they are concentrating not on their own performance or their own egos, but on the success of others working for them, that's a great start. But I've also seen cultures that on face value look quite positive, but they're not. So one of the things we will be talking about is when can collaboration or cooperation not be entirely the best thing. And I've, just skipping to that bit, I've been to schools which are struggling. And when you go into the staff room with the teachers and so on, they're all very polite with each other, but they're almost too polite with each other. The objective is just to get on with each other and just simply be nice with each other. And so there's very little challenge, there's very little quality assurance about the work that they're doing because they don't want to upset each other. They don't want to feel as if they're you know, breaking any relationship or whatever. And again, because they're coming at it from the wrong direction, they think that great team spirit is just being friendly all the time. But in fact, it is far from that. You know, really good collaborative, cooperative work happens when people are having really honest debates, are challenging ideas and constantly looking to improve what they're doing. Not criticizing each other, but looking at how we can improve what we're physically doing. So there are many schools where on face value, you think there is a culture of collaboration, but it isn't. And when you go under the surface, it's simply working together as a team to make us all feel a bit better. And actually some people say, well, I'm not going to be challenging to this individual there or that person over there because I don't want to get challenged back. And then what we tend to get, and I'm afraid history is full of collaborative or team working, which becomes very mediocre, very average, very easy and non-progressive. And that is the flip side of collaboration that we have to be aware of, you know, and those can be some of the pitfalls.
I've heard of this flip side. Fortunately or unfortunately, I've heard many organizations, many schools, school families that, or some particular members, if I would ask, how would you describe your relationship with their colleagues or the culture itself? They would say that everything is nice, everything is good. Yeah. And if you would go down on this level of day-to-day communication, or how a person feels in that school, how valued they feel, or how cooperative they can be with their colleagues, or even if you would go and observe a day in a school, you would see something that would contradict this completely. Yeah. So one could then think that, okay, this is this typical case of this being in the comfort zone and avoiding the conflicts that could be good for group development, this organization development. How to push through the average is my question. Well,
it is. Well, I mean, you've to some extent you've answered the question for me there. So because if we're accepting the fact that working, as my opening statements, working cooperatively and collaboratively, by definition, you can get several minds, 10, 15 minds working together, you know, solving problems that one person or two people on their own cannot solve. there are obvious benefits to working collaboratively. I mean, clearly. But if we're not careful, if it's not well led, if it's not well managed, if the culture of collaboration is poorly run, then we slip into the opposite scenario, which is, as you've described, being very comfortable, not being challenged, not wishing to upset somebody, or thinking that you're going to upset them if you'll challenge them in some way. And so we've got to get the blend between working collaboratively together and the flip side, which some institutions just focus on this, and that's working in competition and working alone. So if you think about it, you can work together in a team as a collaboration, or you can work on your own and you can work in competition. What we've got to do is combine the two to understand that actually you've got to compete to get better. There's nothing wrong with competition as long as it's done properly, because competition drives motivation. It drives individuals to improve their performance. And if we haven't got individuals who are taking responsibility for wanting to get better, they are not going to bring that improved performance to the team, to the collaborative group. So then that's when you can drift back into mediocrity. And
so competing with your own professionality, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, inevitably competition, if we take something which is easier to understand, such as sport, you know, I think most people understand that competition from a sporting environment is good, because people look at what they need to do to get better. They look at what they need to do to beat another football or rugby or volleyball team, and they understand that actually this will create improvement. Now, as long as the success isn't to beat the other person, the success is to get better and improve your performance. And one of those things is you win a cup or something, which is neither here nor there. As far as schools are concerned, we want them to somehow compete, but in a collaborative way. And that the two are not mutually exclusive. They can happen. You can promote competition, friendly competition, and within the school and within the school environment. Inevitably, there's got to be some degree of competition. Otherwise, we'd have everybody at the same level. There are going to be those that are going to be promoted, those that are going to advance ahead of others. And we've got to have people working alone as well, because if groups are going to do really well, if a collaborative effort is going to do really well, you must have individuals working on their own to bring back some high quality material to that group's working. So I don't see them as being contradictory. I don't see competition and working alone as being something which disadvantages collaborative working. I just don't think it does. And I've never seen any evidence of it. Now, if that competition is allowed to become the be all and end all, and if people are saying, well, actually, the most important thing is for me to get on at the expense of other people, then that's when it's gone wrong. That's when it's seriously gone wrong. That shouldn't be the case, and certainly doesn't need to be the case.
I think the question I hear oftentimes is, should I cooperate? Should I collaborate with my colleagues in my school, with the parents at all costs? Should I do it? And partly you answered this with the purposefulness of it all, that if we have a purpose to do it, then we should do it.
Yes.
And if we don't have a purpose for it, then we should perhaps think about it, whether to do it or not. Or
absolutely right. You're only working together cooperatively to solve a problem, you know, or to make improvements. Otherwise, you know, that team performance in that particular case just becomes something that is pleasant to do, but is actually not achieving very much. Okay, now that may improve some form of relationships, but I think it weakens effective collaboration when there isn't proper purpose. And, you know, and the schools that create really good collaborative environments are ones that understand, if we're going to have collaboration, it's got to be with colleagues working purposefully together, professionally, being able to challenge each other, to have proper debates about whether something is right or wrong, or we're doing this in the best way, to understand that those debates can happen and they're not challenging individuals' personalities, or you know, they're not causing emotional stress. But that's a quite difficult thing to do. And the best schools are the ones where they use their own talent within the school. So I've visited several schools recently where they focus almost entirely on teacher training, almost more than the children. Now that sounds a bit bizarre because they're very successful for the students, but by focusing on training and development of the teachers, they almost guarantee much better teachers and much better outcomes for the students. And they do that by ensuring that the teachers train each other. So each teacher has to run a session for at least 7 or 8 other teachers, at least a half-an-hour session every 10 or 12 weeks. And each teacher also has to attend a session run by another teacher. So you get this wonderful sharing of expertise. And I guarantee I could visit any school in Estonia and there'll be 30, 40, 50, 60 teachers there. And the level of expertise, the skill sets, the interest, the competence will be astonishing. And most schools don't tap into that expertise by ensuring that they train each other. And it's a wonderful way of creating a sense of value, because if I'm training colleagues, if I'm working with my other colleagues, sharing my expertise, I get positive feedback. It means those other colleagues are feeling as if they're not alone, that they've got colleagues that they can go to for support and for some help and for some guidance. And it's a very, very purposeful way of creating a culture within the school which is mutually supportive, but it's not, oh, we're all going to be just nice to each other for the sake of it. You know, we're going to be professionals. And I think that's an excellent way of going about it. With
this, I hear a lot of this, let's say for me, it's a mindset thing. There's this answer that goes around about almost everything is the factor of time. That's, oh, I would like to, I would want to, I would desire, but I don't have the time. Or where would we get the time, find the time? So speaking of the last thing you said, that how to create this in-house use of the talent and use this different professionals to teach each other and encourage and support each other. Where would one find the time for it, or how have you gone about it in your work?
Well, you know, Marie, that is something I have heard so much over the 40 years I've been in education. And I'm going to be a bit critical here now. This is not criticizing you. I'm being a bit critical of that as an excuse. I hear that all the time. Oh, we haven't got the time. We don't have the opportunity to do that. Again, it goes to the leadership of the school. If we are establishing what are the priorities, then it's the leadership's job to ensure that people have the time to do that. And certainly when I've gone into schools and people are exhausted and they're in meeting after meeting, I'd say at least 80% of those meetings are not necessary, or they could be done in 10 minutes rather than 1 hour if they were run effectively, efficiently, with high quality agendas. And you know, so instead of having an evening, I don't know how it works in Estonia, but instead of having an evening where there's a meeting for an hour and a half, you say, right, this meeting's got to be done in 20 minutes. So focus on what the priorities are. You've got 20 minutes to get them done, because after that, we're then going to spend 3/4 of an hour, 45 minutes, training each other. And that's when you might go into what in English school we call pit stops, because a bit like, you know, a car on a racetrack stopping to get a service, these teachers go around and are trained by each other in those sessions. So I'm afraid it is an excuse. It's a feeble excuse to say we don't have time. Now, teachers may not have time, in which case, whatever the reasons for them feeling that they're exhausted, that needs to be addressed. But if we don't find time for such things as improving our capability, improving our confidence, making us better at communicating and relating with people, then all the other stuff is a waste of time. We've got to avoid it. But you can see we keep going back full circle. What are the senior leadership of the school doing? If they don't get that right, then I'm afraid it would be a viable excuse. Because, you know, if you're spending an hour and a half on a meeting where in all essence, all you're doing is 15 minutes of work, and unfortunately I've seen too many meetings like that, then where you know, in those meetings, being blunt, you'll have a poorly organized agenda. You'll have a lot of people scoring points off each other, you know, having a go at somebody else for not having done something, or criticizing something somebody else is doing because it makes them appear better. All those kind of machinations, all those sort of internal politics, they need to be taken out of meetings. They need to be run very efficiently. And you know, most meetings could be done in 20 minutes, not an hour and 20 minutes. And I think there's a lot of ways that schools can create time for the most important things, if they've got the courage to do it. And then sometimes you just have to say to teachers, no, you will do this because this is more important than some other stuff. So the other stuff can go, but you will do this.
This is brilliant. So if a school leader hears many times this feedback of I don't have time, or we don't have time, or thinks that we don't have time, the solution is that make time.
Absolutely.
Take time.
Yeah, I mean, you don't ignore it, because I'm sure, you know, I'm not suggesting that teachers will be saying that because they're lazy, although some will be. Not saying it because they're lazy or they want to avoid issues, but it's an easy excuse. It's an easy way of avoiding the issue, because as you said earlier on, you know, if we're thinking about, we start the day, and, you know, if we think about communicating with parents, I think that what you should do is ring immediately the most difficult parents, because I can assure you that's the most important conversation. Get that done, get it done when you're fresh, get a solution in place. That parent will feel satisfied. You don't leave it for 2 days, so it's going to be an even worse conversation in 2 days. And exactly the same thing it occurs when running a school. Concentrate on the most important things, which are often the hardest things, so we don't tend to want to do them, and then allow time to build the confidence and the competence. Those two things go hand in hand, confidence and competence. But it does require courage. The leaders need to listen. They need to listen to where they can create space, where they can make the organization run much more efficiently, much more smoothly in order to create time. But I've never seen a school that couldn't do that. I mean, I'll give you another example. Whenever I work with teachers, literally teaching them how to write emails, it sounds awful, doesn't it? It sounds terribly patronizing, but teaching them how to write an email, and I say such things as well. What are the 4 points that you want to cover in the email? Are you clear about those 4 points? How are you going to start it? How are you going to summarize it? It needs to be no more than, you know, X number of words long. And I always say to them, whenever you finish, you can always reduce that email by at least 30%. Always, always. No, yes, you can. And when you look at it, you can say, well, yeah, I don't need that sentence. That sentence there is not necessary. That one is just superfluous to what I'm trying to create. And so the same can be done with time. If you look at the school, you can say, well, we don't need that. We don't need to do that. We're spending that amount of time over there. Let's get rid of that and focus on what's the most important. But that's courageous leadership. But it's the most effective, by far the most effective.
Gary, how can we, because we just talked about parents, but in general, it interests me how to differentiate between engagement, which sometimes in schools is dressed as cooperation or claimed as cooperation, just engaging somebody, barely engaging them, inviting them to, let's say, a school end of the year party. Let's invite all the parents, let's engage all the teachers, but in the end, it's just an exchange of, or this performative like value. It's not cooperation that, and we sometimes tend to think of these engagement situations as cooperation or collaboration, but they are not, or are they?
No, they're not. No, and it's like most things in life. You know, you plan things when you've got. I'm a mathematician, a scientist, and I like data. I like evidence before I do things. And if we look at relationships that school have with parents, they need to actually look at what parents are saying to them or what they can get from parental conversations. And parents want to feel valued. They want to trust the school. They want to feel that their voice has some impact. They don't want to run the school. They want to leave that to the professionals. Most parents understand that, at least the vast majority do. But they do need to feel as if they're part of the partnership, not just patronizing part, not just being saying, oh, we're sending you a letter saying how your son or daughter is doing, but an integral part. So one of the, I think, really nice things that schools do at the beginning of a new academic year, they invite the parents in for what I've described to you before as moral dilemma workshops. So situations where they come in, the teachers are prepared socially for it. So, you know, you can't have a relationship with a parent unless you're prepared to go up to them and smile and introduce yourself and actually not be shy about that relationship. Tough though that may be, it's vital that it's done. And so you can set up these evenings where the parents and the teachers sit down together looking at dilemmas that schools face, where there may not be clear and obvious answers. And I think I gave one to you last year where, parents face all sorts of dilemmas when they're trying to manage their children, to say when to say no, when to say yes, all those sorts of things. Well, that can be done in collaboration with the teachers so that both teachers and parents see that there are no easy solutions and that actually the best solutions come from negotiation, discussion, understanding the other side, and then making a decision. And it really does work because those parents then feel empowered and they only develop trust and confidence via those relationships. So if there is no relationship, if there is no communication other than critical communication, by definition, there is no positivity. And without that, you can't go forward.
This is a very good practical recommendation for schools, I feel. And actually, in the Ethics Center, we have dilemma games or values games for school families.
Yeah.
We recently, in 2020, just released the newest game, the Estonian people's game on choices, these value choices. So we have even materials, these practical games to give to schools to use. If they don't want to create their own dilemmas, they can use from there to values clarification and for value communication.
And I'm quite sure they could take those examples you've given them and adapt them to their own community and their own particular need, because there's lots of moral dilemmas that one can look at and it can easily be adapted to suit different scenarios. But it's about how do you engage them, and you can't just leave it to hand. I see some teachers say, oh, look, we've tried to invite the parents in. I say, well, what have you done? Well, we wrote a letter. Well, I'm afraid it's not good enough. You're going to need to write a letter. You're going to have to drop it in another newsletter. You're going to have to get it in a school assembly or a presentation so that the students are talking about it. And then you're going to have to get whoever does it in Estonian schools to actually ring some parents to specifically invite them as individuals. If you imagine you're a parent and I'm ringing you and I say, Mrs. Nummert, we're desperate for you to come to this meeting we've got next week. We've got, the parents of those that are 13 years of age, and we want to discuss ways to avoid bullying in the school. And, we've met you before. We feel you'll be particularly useful. Could you please come along to that meeting to help us out? Now, you would be flattered by that. You'd feel as if the school valued what you thought and that you would then say, yeah, I will come up and help. So schools have to be active about engaging parents. One letter home isn't going to be good enough. It really isn't going to be good enough. It's not courageous enough and it's not determined enough.
Yeah, I agree with you. And what you just shared as an example leads me to a question or a thought. Should the cooperation we have with the families be on more, let's say, more serious matters than usual? Because usually parents are invited to school to hear things that they could also hear from an email, let's say. Absolutely,
yes. Absolutely. If it's going to be a true partnership, by definition, they have to have some role. Now, you don't want a scenario where parents think that if they say something, the school's going to do it. That's the opposite side of it. But if we look at any consultation, indeed, if we take an example of me as a principal, as a head teacher in a school, I have a table of 8 senior colleagues around me. I will listen to what each one of them are saying, and I will weigh it up and look at the pluses and the minuses of what they're saying. But in the end, I will make a decision, which inevitably will be a compromise and will be on a balanced basis. Now, we need to make sure that parents understand that it's a consultative process and that we want their input. But in the end, running the school still has to be left to the teachers. But in my experience, if you've got, 30 parents sat around talking, some of those parents will have outstanding careers themselves. They will be strong in their own fields. They will be accountants. They will be lawyers. They will be engineers. They'll have all sorts of expertise. And it's naive of us to think that they can't bring some really effective solutions or thoughts or ideas to the school. It's a great source of skills that we tend to ignore because we're frightened of it. We're frightened of it,
As a school leader, have to have set the structure of the communication, of the cooperation, right?
Yeah.
Because you are there and the parents, they are They are there for some time with their kid, but they are not there for forever.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And, you know, certainly as a head teacher, I used to have many roles, but I used to make sure that I was always at the beginning of the day and at the end of the school day. I'd be out there on the school gates. I'd be talking to parents. I wasn't going to be their friend. I wasn't going to be, you know, somebody who they were going to talk to as if I was just their next door neighbor. I wanted to be friendly. I wanted to be approachable, but I still was the head teacher. I still had to have that professional distance, but it can be done. You know, you can be a professional head teacher and have a very warm, positive relationship with parents. It's that the two are not mutually exclusive, not at all.
Considering the kind of like the lines of professionality that you said, that you are not their buddy, you are friendly, and you are friendly and open in your role. You understand that you're in the role of a head teacher, which in Estonia would be the teacher of a principal. Or if I am a teacher in your school, I have to understand that the teacher thing is my role.
Yes.
I am in my role, I am friendly, but I have also other roles. I'm a person and somebody's partner. And how to, especially in these very difficult times where COVID crisis has forced us into homes and the communication and cooperation have become much, much more necessary or evident, I would say, in relationships. How can I, let's say, set boundaries as a teacher or as a school board member or a principal to my teachers in this cooperation and communication? Because I feel there need to be boundaries, especially with this time. The boundaries have been lost, that you can call me anytime, you can contact me, because we are distanced from each other.
But you're already describing what wasn't a good setup for the relationship. You know, to say to a parent, you can call me anytime and send me an email and I'll deal with it, that's not a positive relationship. That's a that is a one-sided relationship. So that should never have been set up as a relationship in the first place. You know, when people, I mean, I stress it, you stress it as well, there's a difference between being friendly and being their friend. Friendly, as far as I'm concerned, means that you're approachable, that you're going to listen to somebody, that they feel that they trust you, and that you're actually going to listen to them. But you can still have massive professional distance between yourself and a parent, and indeed somebody else in the school. And that needs to be clear all the time. So certainly board members mustn't be involved in the operational matters of a school, and parents must never feel that they're going to be able to dictate or determine what happens in the school. They can work with the school, but the school is making the decisions. And that's up to, again, the leadership to be crystal clear about the boundaries, you know, and discuss them beforehand. Discuss what is acceptable conversation, what isn't. But certainly saying to parents, oh yeah, just send me an email. And because we've had the same here in the UK, where parents were getting used to sending emails, and then teachers were writing emails on a Sunday afternoon, and then parents were getting upset because they hadn't been responded to by 7 o'clock on the Monday morning. Well, that's a poor setup, and that's unsustainable, and that needs to be eliminated, and very, very rapidly indeed. Yeah. There are positives from it. One of the things that I've noticed over COVID, over the last 14 months in particular, is that, and I'm sure it's the same in Estonia, English schools often start the day with an assembly when the head teacher or somebody will have a group of people in a hall and we'll talk about values or something, you know, hopefully inspiring or important to the school life or whatever. And of course, largely parents never saw that or never heard it. Whereas now a lot of those assemblies, a lot of those presentations are now being done online, and parents are at home and they were listening to those presentations, those assemblies, and actually they have a greater understanding now of what the school is trying to do in terms of values. So that ability to be able to communicate with parents via such things as multiple Zoom meetings and so on, that's an advantage that's come out of COVID that we can use going forward.
In your experience during this crisis, did you see some, let's say, excellent examples of schools adapting these cooperation practices? Because I really, really feel that not only cooperation as a value or this communication, the necessity for good communication and the structure for communication, that, let's say this, the need for clear values became very apparent during this crisis in schools, and many schools reflected, let's say, in their description of the crisis. So have you met any head teachers, parents who say that my school dealt with this excellent? I felt this cooperative spirit throughout the crisis.
I'm not entirely sure. If I was to be really honest with you, Maria, I'm not entirely sure that they would say the cooperative spirit was established or enhanced over the COVID scenario. But in terms of communication, which inevitably will lead to better cooperation, if what I've said earlier makes some sense, then the schools that I have worked with are really focused on their communications with parents. So sending much more regular bulletins home, having presentations such as what we're doing here now, which will explain what's going on, particularly when they were engaged in online lessons, chasing those things up. So communication and understanding of what the difficulties were to overcome them together did improve. And certain things did come out. I mean, when schools were working in bubbles, some schools now are keeping students in bubbles. Not entirely, but younger students are having more time separated from older students so that they're not necessarily negatively influenced. So there's a lot of things that are coming out of it. There's a lot of negativity. I think behaviour has got worse since English schools have now gone back. There are no restrictions now. There is undoubtedly a sense that certain behaviours which require children to show self-regulation are not as good as they were. And younger children in primary schools, the first schools, we've got 6 and 7-year-olds now who really haven't experienced any routine of school. And if they're coming from badly routined parental backgrounds or indifferent parental backgrounds in terms of structure, they're finding it a real struggle. And I think it's going to take several years to eliminate some of those pockets of difficulties. And certainly here in the UK, we're very much focused on catch up and trying to recover. But the very best schools that have had values have understood that those values have come to the forefront when it's been tested, as all values are. You know, you're tested when you're challenged, and COVID has challenged all of us. And if you're a school that's based on really shallow values, or those values are not lived within everything the school does, I'm afraid you will have been exposed, and probably still are being exposed. And I bet that's the same across the world, in all honesty.
I really do hope sometimes in these situations that if the house of cards falls under this pressure, that those people in the card house would have the courage and also the, let's say, the strength to rebuild or start building, especially considering the trying time as well. Gary, I am a young educator. What can you...
What are you going to say now? You be careful what you say now. You're a young educator and you're going to say...
Young in experience, let's say, compared to your experience. I'm not that young in that sort of sense, but at least in experience compared to you. What can I, as an educator, critically ask myself about the value of cooperation today?
I think you need to, well, look, I did say to you that I don't necessarily believe that cooperation is a value in its own right. I think it's an outcome of real values. And those real values are such things as courage, self-regulation, empathy, and so on. So I think, you know, if you're going to be a good collaborator, if you're going to work well in teams, you've got to make sure those 3 values are absolutely outstanding. Every one of us, Marie, can look at how we communicate with other people. Are we being seen positively? And sometimes that requires us to be courageous, to ask people about how we communicate. You know, do you find me positive? How do I appear in meetings? You know, when I write emails, do they make sense to you? Do they communicate accurately what I'm going to... And if people are saying, do you know what, Marie, I'm glad you said that to me because I'm not sure, then we have to respond positively to that. And that's how we change for the better, you know, that when we have the inner courage to be able to take criticism that helps us improve, but we then don't say, well, I don't believe that, and become aggressive and negative in response. But that requires us to be confident individuals, very confident individuals. So yeah, anything that comes out of this hour, communication, communication, communication. That's it. Number one, absolute number one. That's the underpinning of all high quality relationships in our society. Number one.
We will write it down and put it on a poster. Communication, communication, communication.
Yeah. Body language, tone of voice, and words that you use. Those are the three bits.
Thank you so much, Gary.
It's my pleasure, Marie. And I do hope to be, as we discussed, I've never been to Estonia. I'd love to visit.